Hello there. This is going to be an amazing 25-minute talk about how we can create PostGIS APIs directly using PostgREST. Now, if you don't know what is PostgREST, this is going to be a mind-blowing session for you guys. The idea behind this session is to understand how we can bypass the entire backend framework and create APIs directly from database itself. PostgREST allows us to create APIs from Postgres database directly. Little bit information about my company. The company name is Rotten Grapes Pvt Limited, your Spatial partner. And the table of content for this talk is going to be, we will first have a look at introduction, what exactly is PostgREST. Second is set up the Postgres database with schema, roles, etc. Then actually using PostgREST, and finally introducing PostGIS flavor in PostgREST itself. A little bit about our company. So there are plenty of fishes in the sea. Why us? We have been providing service for more than 4 years now. We are Startup India recognized, open source believers and contributors. We heavily contribute to a lot of different open source packages. We have clients across all 6 continents, and yeah, if you know someone in the 7th continent, definitely we can help them. We do provide support and training as well, so you can reach out to us over email ID or on my website. We do have our own products. One is WineTest, where we provide testing as a service, and another is GeoServe, where we are providing enterprise GeoServer support. That means logging, taking snapshots, setting up optimization of your GeoServer, etc. Apart from that, we do create open source geospatial applications for a lot of companies around the globe. Now let's get into the Postgres. So what the heck is Postgres and why you will love it? A stressful day for a backend developer's life is to get a data from database and then figuring out what is the latest trend or what might be the best way to create APIs, and then serving those APIs using something like OpenAPI spec or any other standard. The sleepless night in backend developers life is when you are creating APIs. You have to be sure that you are using strict typings, you are using ORMs, authentication, authorization, you are writing dry code, the code itself is scalable, you are following all the standards out there, and most important is interoperability of that particular APIs that you are building. So this is where PostgREST comes into the picture, because Postgres has database as a single source of truth. So for all of your authentication, authorization and data itself, the database, the Postgres database itself is a single source of truth. Then it is using declarative programming and it is leak proof abstraction. Now let's get into setting up of Postgres SQL. So you can simply refer to this using PostGIS in Postgres under Rotten Grapes Pvt Limited, and you can simply take the clone of this repository. So I will simply do git clone, and now I will get inside the repository and I will open it in my VS Code. If you are using something else, that's totally fine. Now the reason why I have pulled this particular repository is I have created a Docker Compose file for you right away, so that you can start all the services that are required. Now if you already have Postgres running on your system and you want to use that, that's totally fine, you can definitely do that. But for some reason, if you want to do a fresh Postgres and fresh Swagger installation, you can then follow this Docker Compose file. So this Docker Compose file simply has one volume for our Postgres data. Then we are pulling the image from PostgREST, and we are using port 3000 for our local host as well. So we are mapping port 3000 to 3000, and this is the environment that I'm providing. So as of now, you don't have to understand what all these different environments. We will simply move to our next service, which is the database. So we are using Kartoza PostGIS. Shout out to Kartoza. They have been doing amazing work with some of the open source libraries, and I'm exposing it to 5437 because I already have a local Postgres instance running at 5432, and this is the username, password and database for my Postgres. And finally, I am also using Swagger. So this is purely optional, and the only reason I am doing this is then I can actually see the OpenAPI spec document created by Postgres directly on web application itself. If you don't want to do that, that's totally fine. You can use softwares like Postman or maybe Thunderbolt client in VS Code itself to execute APIs. That is totally up to you. But for me, I will be using Swagger. So I'll simply start the Docker Compose. There you go. So you can find entire documentation on the postgres.org, and the documentation is well written. We have been using the documentation for a long time and it has almost everything that you need. I would highly recommend to check out the community tutorials, because this can be an amazing way for you to understand how people are building different things using PostgREST. Alright, now let us check VS Code one more time, and I believe everything is up and running. So by this logic, if I go to localhost 8081, I should be able to see my Swagger documentation. And there we go. So Swagger documentation looks like it's working, but the problem is with the Postgres itself. So I'll try to do localhost 3000, and now you will get first error that the role web anon does not exist. The reason why we got this error is because we have a fresh installation and we have not set up our database in order to use PostgREST. So PostgREST requires few of the things to be up and running before you can start using it. First and foremost is the database URI itself. So Postgres, the username, the password, @host, the port and the database itself. Then you need an anonymous role. I'll get back to this later. Then you need a schema. So generally it can be public, or if you want to use any other schema you can do that, and a JWT token secret. So the anonymous role, the idea behind anonymous role is we are creating APIs, right? So at the end of the day, there will be few APIs that we want people to access publicly. That means without having any sort of authentication. And we are creating a role inside Postgres, and then we are assigning that role as a public role. So remember when I told you that database is a single source of truth. That means apart from the data itself, the authorization authentication is also part of database configuration itself. So first of all, we will have to create this web anon role in our database and make it a publicly accessible role, and then JWT secret, we will get back to it later. Now I will simply start a PG admin on my local. Again, PG admin can also become part of uh, your entire Docker Compose file, but that's totally up to you. And there you go. So I will simply add a new server with the name PGR and localhost 5437, my DB, my user, sorry, it will be over here. Then we have my user and my password. There we go. Once I save this, I have my database over here, and I can go inside my database, and as you can see, by default we have cron, public and topology. So we will start with public first, and then we will maybe create another schema later in our course. So as of now, we do have public schema, but we don't have the role itself available. So now what we will do is we will simply create a query where we can then create this role. Create role web anon no login. Once the role is created, now we can grant the access of public schema to this role. Alright. So far we have created the role. That means if I refresh, I will be able to see my OpenAPI spec document, and that means if I refresh, I will be able to see things in it. Now you might be wondering that we have not created anything and still we have so many APIs ready. This is because we are using PostGIS, and PostGIS by default will create all these different functions inside our public URL, and then we can simply start using those functions. So now essentially we have created our schema, and now we can create a table and everything from the code that I have given in the repository. So I will simply copy that code. So I will simply paste this. So we are simply creating a to-dos list where we are adding id done, which will be a boolean either true or false, task, and due, which will be a timestamp, and we are simply adding two data sets into this. Once the data is added, we will also need to allow web anon role to access this data. Now I will again come back and I will grant the select access, because remember that we are creating a public user, right? So we have to create give the select access only. Now if I go back to my Swagger, you will see that the to-dos won't be available over here. So the data that we created just now, it's not available over here. But if I try to execute it like this, you will see that we are getting the data. This is because we will need to restart our Docker file in order to get the PostgREST to update its OpenAPI spec documentation. So I'll simply stop this and I'll spin it up again. All right. And now the main reason why we want to use PostgREST is because it supports lot of things by default. So for example, if you want to get the data from table, you can simply use the operators available. For example, you can do all type of queries like equals, greater than or equal, less than, and all these different queries depending upon whether your data is a string or boolean or numeric. You can perform all these different types of queries directly. So now if we go to our application and if we refresh, we should be able to see to-dos column, and there we go. So here you can see that we do have the to-dos column available right away. Now here I can simply start executing the command. So if we go back to our pgadmin, you will see that if I just look at the data that we have in to-dos, so select star from to-dos, you will see that we have a task, let's say with ID 1, and the way we will do the query is we will simply put, as you can see over here, we have to use eq. So that means we'll have to do something like id eq dot 1, that means id is equal to 1, and that's how we got the number 1. We can do gt, which means greater than, so I can simply do gt dot 1 and it will give me the data which is greater than 1. So this is how you can see that PostgREST directly provides the ability to create these different APIs right away. So imagine that if even if you have you can use logical operators, you can use like modifier operators, you can also do full text search directly using PostgREST itself. So this becomes a very useful thing for you, that if you are using PostgREST, you can directly use PostgREST to create APIs for all the tables that you have. Now going to the next thing, what other tools that Postgres provides. So far we have seen only the get part of it, but Postgres can also help you to set up the post part of it. So when I say post, I mean you want user to be authenticated first, or only in order to start sending the data back to the database. So in order to do that, we can simply create a a user which will be obviously a secured user, and then we can access the we can give access to that user. So I will simply create a user. So here I'm creating a secured user with the password secured user, and then I'm creating a secured role. I'm assigning secured role to the secured user, and then for the public schema I'm using secured role, and then for public dot to-dos we are giving all grants to secured role. Like this, if I execute, I have got the grant. Now in order for me to send data to do, for example, at this point of time, if I copy this, if I go to post call, I don't need param, and if I simply go to body, and maybe I can start sending data back. So I'll remove this, I'll remove this, I'll remove this, and maybe the task can be something like task done is true and deliver PG content. Alright, now if I try to execute, it will definitely give me an error that permission denied, because if you remember, we are still using the web anonymous role. Now in order to use this new role that we have created, we can simply generate a JWT token, and this JWT token will require two things. First is the role itself. So my role as per my PG admin is secured role, so I will simply use that over here. And for the secret key, now this is where the environment variable that we have passed as a JWT secret will be useful. So I can simply copy this and I can put it in my JWT secret, and I got my secret key. Obviously this is not so secret because anyone can decode it, but at least this will give you an idea that how you can secure your post calls. So only people who knows the signature, that means your secure key, will be able to access it. Now if I go to authorization, bearer token, and if I pass this token, voila, the data is created. Now if I try to execute get call again, you will see that our third data point is or the feature is created. So this is how you can configure the security as well. There are multiple levels of securities that you can do. If you want to create a system where user will pass a username and password or email and password, and then you will generate token on the fly, you can do that as well. There are documentation available on the PostgREST website itself on how to do that. Now we can also get data in various different formats. So for example, we can get the data as a CSV. So if I simply pass the header as, so we don't need authorization now, but I will simply pass accept headers as text CSV. You will see that I can get the data as a CSV. If I pass application JSON, I'll get as a JSON. And since we are going to talk about PostGIS, there is also a default thing available which is known as application GeoJSON. So it will give the data as GeoJSON, and obviously at this point of time we don't have geometry column, so it will not work. Now to quickly add a geometry column, I will use QGIS. Let me bring QGIS from another screen as well. So I'll simply go to Postgres, and I do have PGREST available, so my user and my password. All right, and in public now we will simply post two data sets. All right, and now I will simply send this data to my database. So I'll do countries and I'll do ports, and I'll simply send them in public. Now you have to remember that once the data is added, we will be able to use it in our API directly, but in order to see them in OpenAPI spec document, we will have to refresh the database. So but first thing first is we will have to grant the access, right? So I will simply grant the access. So I will grant access on ports and countries. All right, now if I go to the database and sorry, if I go to my API and if I search for ports, you will see that we got the ports data. But obviously in order to use it over here, we will have to refresh. So okay, we are getting error because the authorization that we have passed is for the secured role, and obviously that is not, we have not granted the access. So now if I remove everything, I believe it should work. So in header, I will remove everything. I'll make sure that I don't have any headers that I don't want to pass. And there you go. Now the data is visible. Now if I do accept as a GeoJSON, you will see that we now got the data back in a GeoJSON format. So this is the beauty of Postgres, that we get to do all these things right away. Just like how we executed the metadata query, we can simply do the same type of query over here, where for example we can pass ID maybe less than 10, and we can limit, let's say only 5. Let's see what do we get. So you'll see that we only got 5 data sets back. Now next thing is that how exactly we can use PostGIS function. So if you remember, I had this PostGIS function list open where we have like around 1478 functions. Now in order to use those functions, you can simply look at their definition. So for example, if I take a look at one of the functions, just a minute, let me bring that up. So if I look at one of the functions which is st_intersects, you will see that by definition st_intersects wants two geometry, right? And it will tell you whether that whether the geometry intersects or not. So if I look for intersects, you will see that it will ask for geom A and geom B, and then it will simply check out this thing. So we can directly use these functions right away, as shown in the Swagger UI, that there are all these functions available. So if I simply search for st_intersects, so I can then use this RPC. So we can use this function. So what I will do is I will simply copy this function name. I will open in my Postman and I will put this RPC over here. And now as per the documentation, we have to pass two geometries, right? So we can simply look what they are passing over here. So this one is obviously for raster because ST intersect also works for raster. As you can see over here, if you look at the documentation of ST intersects, you will see that we do have geometry, we do have geom1 and geom2, and we do have rast1, nband1, nband2, like that. So we can simply use this function where we have a geom1 and geom2 as two different parameters that we have to pass. So I can do geom1 and I can pass point 1 1, and then I can pass geom2 where let's say it will be polygon. You will see that we got the true value. That means it works. So the geometry is in fact within it. But if I try to do something crazy like 12,1, you will see that we got false. So just like that, the way you can use PostGIS functions in PostgREST is by simply referring to the documentation, simply trying to understand what that is about. So I can do one more thing which can be helpful, which is ST transform. So ST transform can help you to do the transformation of coordinate systems for the geometry. So for example, we have 1,1 and we want to transform it from EPSG 4326 to 3857. So we can do that. Finally, the last thing that I would like to show you is how exactly we can also use our own function. So I have this function over here which I will simply show you. So this function takes two parameters, one is latitude, one is longitude, and it will essentially return the country name as a character, obviously. And the way it will work is it will do st within for the countries table. So if you remember, we added countries and ports. So the countries table, it will look for that countries table and it will find out which country contains that particular lat long that we are passing, and then it will simply return the name. So if I execute this function, it will be added, and then I can start using this function in my application. So I can simply pass this, and then I know that I have to pass lat and long. So I can simply send lat as let's say 21 and lon as 71, and I hope to get the results in India. Alright, so because we have added the function, we will again need to restart in order to register that function with PostgREST. And there you go. Now we got India. So if I pass something like -4,71, I'm not sure what we'll get, but yeah, we got 0 results because there is no country over there. So yeah, so this is what I wanted to present to you, that these are all wild possibilities that we have with PostgREST and PostGIS. Of course, there are n number of things that we can do. We can definitely talk more about how to put PostgREST into production mode, or how to resolve the course policy, and so on and so forth. So I hope to connect with you guys afterwards to discuss more about it. Thank you, Crunchy Data, for giving me this opportunity and talk about PostgREST. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much, Krishna, for sharing that with us.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful.
It was. It's great. I mean, people don't necessarily recognize how little middleware you need in order to publish like a full web API, and you just showed it. You just stood up a whole web API and defined it, and all it took was a couple of function definitions. And I love this stuff around web security. That's a piece of PostgREST I didn't realize existed. Did you have a real-world customer problem that led you to learn PostgREST?
So there was one of the applications that we were working on in the past, which only had PostgREST and PostGIS as a data set, and we were trying to understand how we can bypass the entire, fast API. Because the reason was that the client was very sure we were only going to use PostGIS as the database. We thought, okay, maybe we can try this PostgREST. I talked with few people, and I found out that it's really, really amazing. Last year, also at the PostgREST conference, I met so many people who said that, okay, they started using PostgREST as just as an MVP, but they ended up putting it in production, and it's been working amazing for them. So yeah, I mean, we had a couple of use cases and hope to find bigger use cases in upcoming days now.
Awesome.
Perfect.
So yeah, so there's a question from the chat. Is there any impact on performance using PostgREST?
Yeah, there is impact. Your performance will increase because you're essentially directly using data and authorization from Postgres itself. So all you have to figure out is how you can create roles and users, and how you can manage your authorization inside Postgres itself, and then you can directly use it. So that takes out the pressure of having an additional layer of ORMs, or trying to figure out different programming languages and their hacks in order to create a fast fast working APIs. So definitely, this is something that is worth trying for every backend engineer, is what I would highly recommend.
Awesome. Did you have any second thoughts around the fact that PostgREST is written in Haskell? Not exactly the world's most common systems
Yeah,
language.
yeah. So I do feel that, okay, sometimes that I know that I can contribute to the library, but because I don't know the language, it's a barrier. To be honest, it's a barrier. But so far I have not came up with a situation where it's it really made me switch from Postgres and never to look back at it,
Yeah.
look back at it again. Also, there is a Gitter channel, and it's pretty active, so people are pretty active over there. But yeah, so far I've been only contributing into the documentation side of it. Hopefully, I'll be able to contribute more on the coding side of it as well.
Yeah.
So
Well, an
yeah,
active community will cover for any number of weirdnesses in the code base. Let me tell you. So it's good to hear. It's good to hear that Postgres has a good community behind it.
yeah.
Okay, so it's half hour on the half hour. We're going to move on to our next talk. Thank you so much, Krishna, for sharing with us. It was great to hear your
Thank you,
talk.
thank you, thank you.